Hi, this is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Always warm, always sunny, sometimes Colorado. Just got a haircut. You guys like it? Did the Lincoln with the beard. Today is November 26th, and it's a double header. So, second video today, 2024. Making a video talk about something that's unfinished business with Cardano. And recent events have kind of precipitated a conversation where we might want to actually look into it and think about it a little bit more. First off, though, anytime I see a really interesting novel thing that's new that I really haven't seen before, that actually has something that brings a new conversation to the table, I always give credit where credit is due. And a paper crossed my desk recently, written by my good friend Andrew Miller from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and Ethan Buckman. And Ethan actually was part of Cosmos before that. He was actually one of the guys I hired when I was the CEO of Ethereum. Ethan and what was his name? The other kid with the glasses who worked for Casper, Vlad Zamfir. But Cycles protocol is pretty interesting. A peer-to-peer electronic clearing system. For centuries, financial institutions have responded to liquidity challenges by forming closed, centralized clearing clubs with strict rules and membership that allows them to collaborate on using the least money to discharge the most debt. As closed clubs, most of the general public has been excluded from participation, but the vast majority of private sector actors consist of micro and small firms that are vulnerable to late payments and generally ineligible for bank loans. This low liquidity environment often results in gridlock and leads to insolvency, and it is disproportionately impacts small enterprises and communities. On the other hand, blockchain communities have developed open, decentralized settlement systems, along with the proliferation of store of value assets and new lending protocols, allowing anyone to permissionlessly transact and access credit. However, these protocols remain used primarily for speculative purposes and so far have fallen short of the large-scale positive impact on the real economy prophesied by their promoters. We address these challenges by introducing Cycles, an open decentralized clearing, settlement, and issuance protocol. Cycles are designed to enable firms to overcome payment inefficiencies, to reduce their working capital costs, and to leverage diverse assets and liquidity sources, including cryptocurrency stablecoins and lending protocols, in service of clearing more debt with less money. Cycle solves real-world liquidity challenges through a privacy-preserving multilateral settlement platform based on a graph optimization algorithm. The design is based on a core insight. Liquidity resides within Cycles in the payment network structure and can be accessed via settlement flows optimized to reduce debt. It's a really cool paper. Achilles heel is trusted hardware, but it starts looking like quantum money. And it's a really, really nifty design. So kudos to Andrew and his co-authors for this. We're going to read it very deeply and gain a better understanding, given that there's some cool stuff we're doing in Midnight that will involve TEE for proof layer for outsourcing proofs. It would be fun to see if we get something like this working, because that would also add Midnight's capability to this. But guys, you need to get off of SGX. There's better trusted hardware for that. All right. Now let's talk a little bit about real world assets for Cardano. Oops. I think I may have just ended the screen share. So let me go ahead and bring that back. Wah! There we go. All right. So recent events, this whole Wyoming stable thing, they assert we don't have a feature. And the feature was freeze and seize. And freeze and seize, so we'll call it F and S. All right. So freeze and seize, when you think about this feature, it really comes into play when you have a central issuer in a regulated market. And that central issuer in a regulated marketplace basically is subject to oversight, or can recall assets. Okay. So imagine you're issuing a security token, and you're going to call this token alpha. And then the issuer says, okay, I'm actually going to change the class of stock, and I'm going to go from ST1 to ST2. Well, that issuer is where all the value comes from, and it's a regulated marketplace. So you'd need a feature or capability to basically say, lock these and replace with this. Okay. So that's a standard pattern. And typically, because you have broker dealers and custodians, it's never a case of a peer to peer event where that occurs, but rather a owner custodian issuer relationship. All right. Well, what else can security tokens do? They also usually pay dividends or rewards. Okay. So you think of like a bond and it has a coupon or these types of things. And there may be complex logic for movement. Okay. Complex logic for movement. So complex logic for movement could be something like, okay, well, Alice wants to send to Bob that security, but can only do so if a certain set of criteria pi are met. Met. There we go. A certain set of criteria are met. Okay. So a contingency. Or maybe Bob has to give permission. So that's a contingent flow. So Alice can only send to Bob if Bob gives permission for this type of stuff. So we have royalties, we have a freeze and seize capability, we have complex logic for movement, so unorthodox transaction patterns. And all of these things probably can be replicated as a smart contract. It's a lot of code, it's a lot of work, but you can write a smart contract for these things. But Cardano has a hybrid issuance system. And so instead of treating assets as ADA plus smart contracts, which is what Ethereum does. So you have Ether and then you have smart contracts with Ethereum. Okay. And that's ERC20 or 701 or whatever the heck the standard is these days that you kids are playing with. Here we have this concept of a Cardano native asset or a Cardano native token. I forget the parlance these days. I could have sworn Polina's paper was asset, but and now I see everybody calling them tokens. I like asset more. CNA or CNT, you have this concept of a native unit of value inside the system. And CNTs are basically treated the same way as ADA inside the system. And we got this idea from color coins way back in the day in the Bitcoin space. And there's two flavors of them. You have non-fungible token standard and fungible token standard. We always had this idea of a third option of a security token or a real world asset, for lack of a better term, because that is a broader thing. Because you could think of real estate, royalty bearing instruments, or complex financial assets. And we thought that after we finished the NFT standard, people would do a lot of issuance that came out in May in 2021. And then we see a lot of cool stuff in smart contracts. And then we'd come back to the CNT world and build this asset. Now, the reason you want to do this is that Cardano is becoming a complex multi-chain, multi-actor network. Okay, so you have real world assets, and we have things like Midnight coming down the horizon, and Midnight is giving us private smart contracts. Okay, and then you have Bitcoin over here, and Bitcoin could end up being a control layer for Cardano smart contracts and asset. So, for example, when you send Bitcoin to Cardano under the scheme that's being developed, you're going to basically create a Cardano wrapped Bitcoin. Well, the Bitcoin network should never lose control or eyesight of that. So you need some special provision in how this asset is accounted for beyond the standard private key encumbrances. Okay, that's how we normally look at it, as a private key. So this is almost like a foreign control. All right, so they need some sort of notion of that. And similarly, Midnight could act as that because it's handling the regulation policy for this. So maybe the KYC and AML is being automated, and Midnight is acting this way, or there's an identity component to it. So there's a DID, but the identity lives and it's private on Midnight, but it's part of the ownership of that particular asset. Stablecoins fall under this use case. You want for circle style stuff, freeze and seize. Okay. But then also, you're probably going to want a compliance schema for OFAC compliance. And then you may actually want some information about the users for certain domains, like the Japan regulations of stablecoins fall under this, the JFSA, for when they're talking about these types of assets. What if you have two flavors of a stable coin, and if you go through compliance, you can get a yield because we can pass the treasury yield to you. And if you don't go through compliance, it's a bearer instrument, just like standard stable coins. So these are the kinds of control flows that can be developed. It's the same for real estate. When you talk about the deeds of real estate, that would be a combination of an NFT, but then there would be some complex logic behind that NFT. Sorry, my Wacom tablet does this from time to time. It goes really far. That's okay. There's no mistakes, only happy accidents. So there's dozens of other things, especially when we talk about royalty flows and dividends. A lot of people in the NFT space, they like this idea that when an NFT is issued, every time it's purchased, let's say Bob buys it from Alice, that the author, the IP originator, basically gets a royalty for that. And you can do this with a smart contract. The disadvantage is it's complex. It's going to be fragmented, meaning there's going to be many different ways of doing it, and it may actually be insecure. Plus, also potentially expensive to do these types of things. Depending upon how complex your royalty scheme is, or the nature of your freeze and seize capabilities, the nature of your transactional contingencies, these types of things, all that type of stuff. So we always intended after NFTs and fungible tokens were done to update the native asset standard to include a real world asset standard. But I think this recent debate, it settles it, because what we're going to do is write a smart contract to demonstrate those capabilities, to say, okay, you guys are wrong, but it should be an easy capability inside the system, built into the system for people who want to issue these things, not to make a state happy, but because you can see there's an enormous amount of utility in having this capability. There are estimated by Bridgewater and BlackRock $20 trillion over the next 10 years of real world assets that could be tokenized. Midnight gives us the ability to do that in an intelligent way, because you can put a disclosure and compliance regime on it, because it's a real world asset. It's bound to a particular set of laws and geography. It has an issuer. It's always going to have an issuer. Its value comes from that issuer. It's not cryptocurrency. It's an RWA running on a cryptocurrency. So this doesn't compromise or impact Cardano. Cardano always stays in that world that has crypto ethos, but Cardano enables these assets to live and coexist. That's the point of having an asset issuance standard. So we know there's quite a bit of money that's floating out there. And with Midnight in Cardano and now Bitcoin DeFi, opening that entire marketplace up, we could get the vast majority of that market, because it's the single best place to do all of it. So here's what we do at IO now. So we have an innovation division. And as you guys know, we took Babel fees and it turned it into nested transactions. And they did that in about 2 PI cycles. So we're going to start a working group. And anybody who's interested in this topic, go ahead and reach out to Sam Leathers. Sam is a product manager on the Cardano side, and you know him. He does a lot of really cool stuff. And Sam can talk to you guys, but I'd like to put a working group together and have that working group go into our innovation process for our next quarter to do exactly what we did with Babel fees, where we wrote a SIP for nested transactions, to write a SIP to augment our native asset standard to include a real WA. And there's a whole list of features that then can come in. And the business requirements are going to be determined not just by this brief whiteboard, but by a lot of real life use cases and conversations about foreign ledger control, like Bitcoin controlling its variant, Midnight controlling a variant, identity embedding, freeze and seize capabilities, dividend capabilities, and things to make real estate easier too, especially for how you handle your metadata embedding inside the system. Okay, and again, you can do this with a smart contract in Cardano already, but again, then depending upon the complexity of this, it can be complex, fragmented, insecure, and expensive to implement and run, and time consuming. And you don't want to do that. You want to take a look at some of these design patterns, especially the royalty pattern, the stablecoin pattern, the real estate pattern, other things, and that you make a special purpose accommodation because we've already done it for our native assets and fungible tokens. So that's what I want to do, and I think the time has come for something like that. Anytime something happens, it's annoying and it's frustrating, and I've been there. As I've mentioned before, I've been in the industry a long time, and I've seen everything. And eventually you get stuff solved, and we push our way through, and it's fine. But it's also an opportunity for growth, and it's not everything is unilaterally 100% somebody else's issue. We know there's a demand and need, and we know that Cardano is becoming a universal ledger for the entire cryptocurrency space. The reality is, if Cardano becomes the DeFi layer of Bitcoin, Cardano is going to likely be the interface upon which Bitcoin talks to all of the other cryptocurrencies across the space. So when Bitcoin wants to talk to Ethereum or Solana, it won't directly bridge, but rather just simply go through Cardano because it has everything it needs to do that in a very secure way. And it has everything they need to do that without trusting a third-party bridge that's multi-sig or and it has some bizarre trust model, and suddenly those wrapped Bitcoin get lost. So this is a really good opportunity for us to kind of reinvent the wheel and understand that it can become the best place for real world assets to exist and live. And there's already a lot of people that are thinking about and doing real world assets. And there's a ton of people already within the Cardano ecosystem who've been thinking about this a lot. And it'd be nice to bring those people in. Italians, my hands are going everywhere. I just knocked over my water. I should put a lid on that. That's okay. I'll clean it up later. But, basically get those people and start talking about it. Just talk to Sam. It's informal. Doesn't have to be intersect or anything like that. It's just a casual conversation about business requirements and how you would use an RWA standard. And then, as I said, we can then put a group together and input output through our innovation division, write a SIP like we did nested transactions. And then through the SIP process, people can get involved, Pragma, intersect, the community as a whole. And then we can figure out a way to get it into the roadmap and hopefully get it in for next year, but at the very least get it in 2026 for the next major upgrade after that hard fork, depending if we have one or two hard forks in 2025. I'd hope for two and have a Christmas miracle, but we'll see. Because there's already a lot going into Plutus 4. Seba is writing some really cool SIPs, and we also have some optimizations for the zero knowledge stuff that are going to come in. And then there's a few other things that are cleanups that are really going to improve the developer experience for Cardano. So it would really be cool to augment the ledger logic in this direction. It just depends on how quickly we can converge to all that. But I think it's going to help us out a lot. And also it settles the debate once and for all. Being a libertarian and creating an open protocol, it's a balancing act because you have beliefs and ideas, but you shouldn't inflict those beliefs and ideas on other people. I'm a little bit of a conservative person, but I don't particularly care what your beliefs are and how you want to use Cardano. I've always felt that the ledger should be open for everyone to use it, regardless of their use case. And the reality is, we live in a world where there are decentralized and centralized behaviors. And just because I'd like to decentralize as much as possible, the reality is there's going to always be centralized actors, no matter what, because your wallet is owned only by you, for example. Would you feel more comfortable if you just split all your money up and gave it to 45 people to take care of? Centralized, it's just you. It's an N of one for it. So no matter what, there's always some degree of centralization of the system. It just depends on how you look at it. And when you talk about business and commerce, people start businesses. People own land. People issue intellectual property. Intellectual property oftentimes has an owner or owners, but they're finite and not changing all the time. And when they do, they change under logic. Royalties are paid. This is the real life. And there's three dimensions to this. You have to have an identity dimension, the who. You look at a beautiful castle, say, who owns that castle? There is the connection point for royalties and payments and all these other things that are associates of the commerce and issuance of these types of things. And then there's the privacy side of it. So we have the privacy side and we have the DID side. We have the identity side, thanks to Midnight coming to Cardano and basically giving that to all the Cardano assets. We haven't really built a good standard, though, for how we want to handle all that cream filling, everything in the middle, the freeze and seize, the royalty management system, and all of these other things. We might as well just put it on the 2025 agenda and get it solved. And then we have it. And that means everybody who's playing in these ponds now has a turnkey and very easy way to handle that. And if there's anything that is unorthodox, then use a smart contract on top of it as the policy behind the token. And that smart contract basically gives you the ability to have unlimited variations of programmability. But if you do it as a base feature of the ledger, then what you get is you get high security, you get low transaction cost, you get ease of issuance. And in many cases, it massively simplifies a lot of workflows that people have. Now, do I agree with freeze and seize of a government? Of course not. I think civil asset forfeiture is one of the great evils of our time. But freeze and seize doesn't just mean it's a use case that a state actor has decided to freeze and seize something. Freeze and seize can be you have an out of date version of a license or software key or NFT, and I'm upgrading to a new version of it. I need to remove from circulation the old things, and I need to put in circulation the new things. Recalls, for example, pretty simple. Identity. You shouldn't have multiple copies of your identity. What if I issued 14 driver's licenses and I just started handing them out? Then 14 people can pretend to be you, especially if they look like you. Well, typically, when the state issues you a new driver's license, they revoke the old one. So they freeze it and seize it and issue something new. So it's not necessarily an adversarial pattern. And the point is that that is not a capability that gets put onto ADA. That is a capability for a user-issued asset. So why should I, as a libertarian, tell a user what they're allowed to do with Cardano? Why should you, who believes in freedom and liberty, say, well, I believe in freedom and liberty, but you only can do the things I like or I agree with, and you can't do the things I dislike and disagree with? That doesn't make any sense at all. Either you're open or not open, and either it's an open protocol that's censorship resistant, you let people do the things they know and love, or you don't, which is why it's very important to have these types of capabilities inside the system for people to choose where and when they make sense. And that's why you title it a real world asset, whether it be a US Treasury, whether it be real estate, whether it be intellectual property, whether it be a complex marker representing a TradFi agreement or a credit system, whatever have you. Some cases you go beyond the bounds of it's a token representing an interest in an ecosystem or a governance token or a utility token, or it's an NFT, it's one of something, and I have to build this big apparatus around it. You can combine these three flavors together with smart contracts to basically create anything that you need. So if this is something that's interesting to you, I want to hear from you, the Cardano community, and from outside of the community as well, what would be useful, because other blockchains are going to control things. For example, if Bitcoin is going to come over to Cardano, I think the Bitcoin users are going to want to have a little bit more say than wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum, where they're completely at the mercy of the security of the Ethereum system. Maybe, just maybe, there's some special logic in that token that's on Cardano that represents Bitcoin that gives the Bitcoin network a little bit of visibility and say in it. That's an example of what we talk about. And that's the exact same controlling style function than when you look at something, for example, like a stock issued by Microsoft on a blockchain, as an example. This type of stuff. Innovation process, as many of you know, is fast. You might have liked the recent win there with our recursive snark team there, where they got the ATMS signature, recursive Halo 2 signature working on Cardano and got it on the mainnet. I saw a month ago a demo where they did it on testnet. I looked at them straight in the face. I said, get it on mainnet. We have to get it done. And they got it done very quickly. That's a really great example of how fast this team can move. So from workshop, we absolutely can get to a SIP. And it's going to be a really good one. And it's the last mile, because at that point, we cover the entire financial world. We just have to start thinking about credit. That's the last component of it. And people like Cycles, they're leading the charge and showcasing how these protocols will work and process. And being a graph-based system doesn't really need a blockchain. You can run on top of it. And that's why I think that's a perfect relationship with Midnight, for example, because they will have trusted enclaves for offloading proof generation when people want to utilize that service to accelerate things. So we could reuse that easily for Oracle and direct observation as well as credit circles, like what Cycles is talking about. So anyway, food for thought. I always try to have a learning, teaching opportunity, a moment of growth whenever something happens or something comes up. And it just occurred to me that we've deferred this conversation for a really long time. 2025 is an open year. There's a lot to do, but I think we can get this done if we come together on it. And it'll be a lot of fun. It'll be a very pedagogical year for these types of things. Thanks, guys. Cheers.